There's something about the sea that gets under your skin. The deeper you go, the more it plays tricks on your mind. Maybe that's why fishermen tend to stick to what they know, not venturing too far. But out there, when the fog rolls in, even the most seasoned of us can't help but feel uneasy. That night, aboard the Blue Horizon, we sailed straight into something we never should have found. Captain Bill had us out for a solid week, chasing a haul that would see us through the next few months. The crew was small. Me, Tommy, and Jules, just the four of us on a 30-year-old trawler that had seen plenty of miles. We were far out to sea when the fog came, swallowing the horizon whole. It wasn't anything we hadn't seen before, but the way it closed in so fast made us all feel a little more alert. "Ship ahead," Captain Bill muttered, staring into the grey. The radar showed a blip, something large, not far off. Soon enough, the outline of a boat appeared. An older vessel like ours, but with weathered sides and tattered nets. The name on the hull read, "The Resolute." She didn't look much older than 30 years, but her condition said otherwise. Still, it wasn't uncommon for boats like hers to be beaten by the sea. We hailed them on the radio. Static. Nothing came back but the crackle of dead air. "Let's get closer," the captain decided. "They might need help." As we neared the Resolute, a few men stood on deck. They didn't wave or call out. They just stood there, watching us. Jules and I exchanged a look, but we shrugged it off. Being at sea does strange things to people. Captain Bill leaned out and called, "You boys all right over there?" One of the men, their captain by the looks of it, nodded. "Engine trouble," he called back, his voice gruff. "Been out here longer than we'd like." It wasn't uncommon to help out stranded crews, so Captain Bill ordered us to board and see what we could do. I took Tommy with me, and we crossed over to the Resolute, toolbox in hand. The men aboard were quiet, tense. Their eyes followed us, but none of them spoke much. They looked worn down, more so than most crews this far out. But that wasn't surprising for a boat stuck at sea. The captain led us below deck to check the engine. It was rusted, badly corroded for a boat only a few decades old. "You been out here long?" I asked, trying to make conversation as I worked. "Longer than we should have," the captain said, his tone short. It was hard to shake the feeling that they were watching us too closely. Tommy, ever the chatty one, kept trying to talk to them, but the crew was distant, giving curt replies that killed any conversation. There was nothing outright strange, just tension, like they were waiting for something. We got the engine patched up enough to give them a tow back to shore. The captain of the Resolute nodded his thanks, though it seemed more obligatory than genuine. We cast off, towing the ship behind us through the fog. The ride back to port was uneventful, but the fog never lifted. It clung to us the whole way, thick and suffocating, the other ship barely visible behind us. No one said much. We were all just eager to be done with it. When we finally made it back to the harbour, I felt a wave of relief. The familiar smell of salt and fish greeted us, and the lights of the dock cut through the mist. As we tied off, the harbour master came down to greet us. "Who's that behind you?" he asked, glancing at the ship we towed in. "The Resolute," Captain Bill said. "They were dead in the water, needed a tow." The harbour master's face paled. He took a step back, eyes wide. "You've got to be joking." Bill frowned. "What do you mean?" "The Resolute went down 30 years ago," the harbour master said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one made it back." I turned to look at the ship tied up behind us. The deck was empty. The crew, the men who had stood there watching us the entire journey back, were gone. I blinked, thinking maybe they'd gone below deck, but something about the ship itself made my stomach turn. The boat looked older, more decayed than it had before. The weathered hull seemed to sag under the weight of years spent at sea. The tattered nets hung limp, caked with dried salt and barnacles, as if they hadn't been touched in decades. "They were just there," I muttered, stepping closer, my voice trailing off as I moved toward the side of the dock to get a better look. I called out, "Captain?" Nothing. The deck was silent. The whole boat was. There was no movement, no sign of life. My throat tightened. I looked back at the others. Captain Bill and Jules stared too, eyes wide, like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Or, rather, what they weren't seeing. They were right there, Jules stammered, his face pale. We boarded the Resolute again, climbing onto the creaking deck, our boots thudding against the old wood. There was no one. The ship, which had seemed like a rough but working vessel just hours earlier, now looked like it had been abandoned for years. The rusted engine we had worked on was in worse shape than we'd remembered, corroded to the point where there was no way it had run in decades. The cabin doors hung crooked, the windows coated with grime. Inside, the air was thick, stale, like it had been sealed off for years. The charts on the table were faded and curling at the edges, stained by salt water. Everything inside was coated with a layer of dust. It didn't make any sense. We had spoken to them, worked alongside them, towed their damn ship all the way back. But there was no one here. They're gone, Captain Bill whispered, though it sounded more like he was trying to convince himself. His hands shook as he pulled at the rusted latch of a door, revealing a cabin filled with broken furniture and rotting wood. I took a step back, my mind racing. How could they just disappear? How had we missed this? The ship was a wreck, not fit for the water. There was no way it could have been crewed, let alone towed back with us. I looked over at Jules, whose face was twisted in disbelief. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered. But I had no answers. When we finally returned to the dock, the harbour master was still there, his brow furrowed. "Where's the crew?" he asked, looking past us at the empty ship. "They were gone when we got here," I said, though even saying the words felt wrong. I couldn't wrap my head around it. There was a crew. We spoke to them. The harbour master frowned. "That boat hasn't been crewed in 30 years, he said. "It was lost at sea. No one survived." I felt the ground sway beneath me. The Resolute was a ghost ship, and we had towed it back. Not knowing, I looked back at the vessel, now still and lifeless in the harbour. The men we had spoken to, worked alongside, had never been there. We had been talking to ghosts. Tommy was the first one. I didn't hear a thing. None of us did. It wasn't until morning that we realized something was wrong. The smell hit first. The stench of death. I went below deck to rouse Tommy for breakfast. But when I opened the door to his cabin, the smell flooded out, thick and heavy. Tommy lay on his bunk, his body completely still, as if he had fallen asleep and never woken up. Except it wasn't that peaceful. His face was twisted, his eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. His mouth was slightly parted, frozen mid-gasp, as though he'd tried to scream. His skin had gone pale, almost bluish, like he'd been dead for days, though he'd spoken just the night before. No sign of struggle, no marks, no explanation. He just died. Jules couldn't handle it. He and Tommy had been close. He paced the deck, muttering to himself, refusing to go anywhere near Tommy's cabin. By nightfall, Jules was a wreck. He locked himself in his cabin, refusing to speak to anyone. Captain Bill knocked a few times, but there was no response, so we left him alone, thinking he needed time to grieve. But deep down, we knew it wasn't just grief. Something had shaken Jules, something he couldn't put into words. The next morning, we found him. The door to Jules' cabin was locked from the inside. We had to break it down to get in, and what we found made my blood run cold. Jules was lying on the bed, but his head wasn't where it should have been. It had been severed cleanly, resting just a foot away on the pillow, eyes wide open in a frozen stare. Blood soaked the sheets, spattering the walls. The smell hit us hard, metallic and thick in the air. His body lay flat on the bed, arms at his sides, almost peaceful if it weren't for the horrific scene surrounding him. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, nothing to suggest he'd fought back. His eyes were wide open, just like Tommy's, but there was terror in them. Whatever had taken Jules, he had seen it coming. No one could have done this and escaped, not with the door locked. But here he was, brutally murdered. It was impossible, and that's what made it terrifying. That's when Captain Bill started losing it. He'd always been the rock, the unshakable leader, the one who kept us all in line. But after Tommy and Jules, something snapped. He stopped sleeping altogether, pacing the deck through the night, his eyes darting toward the sea, as if he expected to see something rise out of it. He kept muttering under his breath, things I couldn't make out, but it was always about the Resolute. Every now and then, I'd catch him staring out into the fog, listening. He swore he could hear the creak of wood on water, the groan of the ghost ship's hull drifting just out of sight. "They're out there," he whispered to me one night. "The crew, they're out there." I tried to calm him down, to tell him it was just the wind, or his mind playing tricks on him. But nothing worked. He was convinced that the crew of the Resolute was still following us. One evening, I found him standing at the bow, staring blankly into the dense fog that clung to the shore. His skin was pale, his hands trembling. "Can't you hear them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're waiting." I listened, but all I heard was the quiet lap of the waves against the dock. Captain Bill turned to me, his eyes hollow, like he wasn't fully there anymore. "They won't let us go," he said, and I could see the fear in his eyes. The kind of fear that grips you when you've seen something you shouldn't have. That night, I woke to find Captain Bill gone. His cabin was empty, his bed untouched. I rushed to the dock, and there he was, standing at the edge, gazing out into the mist, as if he could see something no one else could. His lips were moving, mumbling incoherent words. I stepped closer, and I heard him say, "I have to go." I reached out to grab him, to pull him away from the water, but it was too late. Without a word, Captain Bill stepped off the dock and into the water. His body slipped beneath the surface, swallowed by the sea, as if the fog itself had claimed him. There was no splash, no struggle, just silence as he disappeared. We never found him. If you spend enough time at sea, you learn that the ocean is its own kind of beast. You can have the calmest day, the most predictable weather, but the water can turn on you in ways you'd never expect. I've been fishing off the coast for over 20 years, and I've seen my share of strange things, but nothing like what happened that night. We were about 40 miles offshore, far enough that the coastline was just a memory. The Ocean Star wasn't much to look at, but she got the job done. A creaky old fishing boat, barely holding together, but still seaworthy. The crew was small. Me, Pete, and Al, with the captain, Don, always at the helm. We'd been out for 3 days already, pulling in a decent haul. The sea had been calm, and everything seemed routine, until we hit the dead zone. That's what we called it anyway. The first sign was when the fish stopped biting. Our lines went slack, every last one of them, despite being in a prime fishing spot. It didn't make sense. Pete had marked this area specifically because it always delivered. We tried resetting the nets, switching bait, but nothing, not even a nibble. The air felt strange too, heavy, like a storm was coming, but the sky was clear and the sea was glassy, too glassy. The waves had stopped rolling, leaving us sitting on an unnaturally still surface. Pete and I shared a look, both of us feeling it. The sea was wrong. By dusk, the fog rolled in, thick grey, swallowing the horizon. It moved fast, too fast for comfort. One moment, we could see miles in every direction. The next, we were wrapped in a suffocating wall of mist. Don wasn't worried, though. "Seen it 1,000 times, he muttered from the wheelhouse. "It'll pass." It didn't pass. The fog clung to us as night fell, turning everything damp and cold. We cut the engines, dropped anchor, and decided to wait it out. No use risking running blind in the dark. Al went below deck to sleep, but Pete and I stayed topside, keeping an eye on the water, or what we could see of it anyway. That's when it started. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but Pete heard it too. A faint, low humming noise, like something far away under the water. We couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it was there, steady, pulsing. We leaned over the railing, peering into the fog-draped blackness below. The sound grew louder, vibrating through the hull. "What the hell is that?" Pete whispered. His voice sounded small, lost in the mist. Neither of us had an answer. Then the boat shuddered. It was subtle at first, like a gentle push from below. But then it happened again, harder. Something was moving beneath us, rising from the depths. The water around the Ocean Star started to ripple, slow and deliberate, like something enormous was stirring just out of sight. Pete grabbed a spotlight and aimed it at the water. The beam cut through the fog. illuminating the surface. But instead of calm water, we saw nothing. No fish, no debris. Just an oily black sheen that spread around the boat like a stain. It wasn't normal water. It looked thick, almost alive, the way it shifted and swirled without the wind to drive it. Before I could react, the boat lurched violently to one side. I stumbled, catching myself against the railing, heart pounding. The ocean star groaned under the strain, the deck tilting sharply. Pete was shouting something, but his voice was drowned out by the sound. The humming had turned into a deep, guttural roar, rising from the depths. Then I saw it. The water beneath us. It was moving, rising. Not waves, but something from below, pushing upwards. A massive dark shape began to emerge from the black water, its surface glistening like oil. It wasn't a whale or any sea creature I'd ever seen. It was formless, shifting, almost like it was made of the water itself. The boat rocked again, harder this time, as something slammed into the hull from beneath. I heard the wood splintering. Pete screamed, a panicked, guttural sound, as he stumbled back, dropping the spotlight. The beam flickered as it hit the deck, casting brief flashes of light across the seething mass in the water. And then, in the pale light, I saw it. A tendril, thick and black, slick with the same oily sheen, reached up from the water, wrapping itself around the side of the boat. It wasn't flesh or bone. It was something else. It clung to the hull, pulling with impossible strength, dragging the ocean star deeper into the black water. The boat creaked, groaned, and began to tip. Pete tried to run, but another tendril shot up, wrapping around his ankle. He hit the deck hard, clawing at the boards as he was dragged toward the edge. I rushed to grab him, but the thing yanked him with such force that he was gone in an instant, pulled overboard into the black tide. I froze, my heart racing, unable to comprehend what I'd just seen. The water roared beneath me, and more tendrils began to rise, slithering up the side of the boat, wrapping around the railings, the mast, anything they could latch onto. The ocean star was sinking, being pulled under by something. I ran for the wheelhouse, screaming for Don, but the door was jammed. The boat shuddered again, and I heard the unmistakable sound of the hull cracking. The last thing I saw before the fog consumed everything was the black mass rising higher, engulfing the boat, and then silence. The thing about the ocean that no one tells you is how it can make you feel like the last person on Earth. It strips away the noise and crowds, leaving just you and an endless stretch of water. That's what I thought I needed when Jake and I decided to head out, far from shore, for a weekend of fishing. Jake's always been the kind who thrives on being unreachable, where nothing but the sea and sky can touch you. We loaded the boat with enough supplies to last a few days, expecting nothing more than long hours of quiet, the occasional tug on the line, and some beers. Jake was in his element, leaning against the side of the boat, casting the line like he'd done 100 times before. The first day went by as expected. By nightfall, we anchored in place, letting the boat drift lightly in the calm. The night was pitch black, the kind of dark that swallows everything beyond the faint glow of the boat's deck light. We were miles out, no radio signals, no phone service, just the two of us, floating on a sea that felt indifferent to our existence. I was sitting on the deck, staring out at the water, when I noticed something strange. A faint glow, barely visible, coming from below the surface. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the moonlight, maybe the reflection of something. But as I stared longer, it didn't flicker or fade. The glow was steady, like it was deep beneath us, too deep for anything natural. Jake, my childhood friend, who'd always been unshakable, came over when he saw me looking. We both leaned over the edge, trying to make sense of it. The glow wasn't moving, but it seemed alive in a way. Could be phosphorescent algae, Jake muttered, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. We'd seen that before. This was different. It was too deep, too focused, and far too unsettling to ignore. The glow stayed with us as the night wore on. It never got closer, but it never drifted away either. It was like something down there had decided to stay beneath our boat, hovering in the darkness. After a while, Jake went to bed, laughing it off, saying it was just my imagination. But I stayed up a bit longer, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. Not in a supernatural way, but in the way you know when something is watching you, unseen but present. By morning the glow had vanished, and Jake seemed completely unbothered. We didn't mention it during the day, even as we cast lines into the still, empty water. The calmness of the sea should have been peaceful, but now it just felt like waiting for something to happen. That evening, as the sun set, I tried to push the thoughts of the previous night from my mind. Jake was at the helm, casually steering us to a new spot while I cleaned up the deck. That's when I heard it. The faint sound of something moving in the water, just off the side of the boat. I froze, straining to listen. It wasn't the usual gentle lapping of waves against the hull. This was different, purposeful. Grabbing a flashlight, I leaned over the edge again, scanning the dark surface. At first, all I saw was the moonlit ripples. But then, just as before, the glow returned, brighter this time, closer. It flickered and pulsed, like a heartbeat, growing in intensity with each passing second. It was moving now, slowly, deliberately, circling beneath the boat. Before I could react, the boat lurched violently, not a small shift, but a heavy, sickening pull that made the deck tilt beneath my feet. I stumbled, gripping the railing for balance as my heart pounded in my chest. The water around us churned violently, and the glow beneath us intensified. Whatever was down there wasn't just moving, it was rising. The boat creaked under the strain, and for a brief moment, everything went still. The light dimmed, retreating into the depths. I exhaled, thinking maybe it was over. Maybe whatever was down there had lost interest. But then, without warning, the surface of the water exploded. A column of water shot into the air, drenching the deck and knocking me off my feet. I scrambled to get up, drenched and disoriented, as the boat rocked violently from side to side. The light beneath the boat was now blinding, illuminating the water with an eerie, unnatural glow. My skin prickled with heat, the air thick and stifling around me. And then I saw it. For just a moment, beneath the flickering light, a massive shifting shadow. It was too large to be any sea creature I knew of, too massive and too strange. The light pulsed faster, brighter, until it felt like it was consuming the entire space around the boat, pulling us into its orbit. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The light burned into my mind, filling every corner of my thoughts with a suffocating sense of dread. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it was gone. The water stilled. The light vanished. The boat, now bobbing gently on the surface, was eerily quiet. There was no sign of what had just happened, no glowing water, no shadow lurking beneath the surface. Jake staggered back up from below deck, wide-eyed and pale. Neither of us said a word as we hurried to pull up anchor and steer the boat back towards shore. We left that spot as fast as we could, the silence between us heavy with unspoken fear. There was no question about what we both knew. Something had been out there, something that wasn't meant to be found. I haven't been back out on the water since. Even now, I'm not sure what we encountered that night, but sometimes, late at night, I'll find myself staring out at the horizon. And every now and then, in the distance, I think I can still see that faint, glowing light just beneath the surface. There's something about being on the open sea that brings out the best and the worst in people. The isolation, the endless water stretching in every direction, no land in sight. It changes you. That's probably why the crew of the Blackwater was so tight-knit, and why they didn't take well to outsiders. The Blackwater was a small trawler, nothing fancy, but it got the job done. Captain Hall ran a tight ship, and the crew respected him for it. There was Rob, the first mate, with his gruff demeanor but sharp mind. Mason, who'd been with the Blackwater for over a decade, silent but dependable. And Leo, the youngest of the crew, always quick with a joke. They had their rhythm, their routine, and everything ran smoothly until the new guy showed up. He wasn't much of a talker, kept to himself mostly. He'd been hired on last minute to fill a gap, just one of those things that happens when you're short-staffed at sea. He was quiet, watching the others with an odd sort of intensity. The kind of guy you might pass by without noticing if you weren't paying attention. The crew didn't like him much, but they tolerated him. He was good at his job after all. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The fishing trip went like any other. Long days under the sun, nets cast into the water, the usual banter among the crew. The new guy kept his distance, just a shadow in the background, never really joining in, but always there, watching. Then, things started happening. It was subtle at first. Tools went missing, ropes were cut just slightly, enough to make the work harder. Nothing major, just small inconveniences that slowed the crew down. But the atmosphere began to shift. Rob, ever the vigilant one, started keeping a closer eye on everyone. "Things aren't right," he'd mutter, casting suspicious glances at the new guy. Then Mason disappeared. One evening, after a long day of work, Mason went below deck to get some rest. When the crew woke the next morning, his bunk was empty. At first, they thought maybe he'd gone out early to check something on deck. But when they searched the boat, there was no sign of him. The sea was calm, no storm in the night, nothing to suggest he'd fallen overboard. Captain Hall ordered a full search of the boat. They combed every inch, checked the storage compartments, the galley, but Mason was gone. Just gone. It didn't make sense. Rob was the first to say it. Someone's lying. His eyes narrowed, darting between the remaining crew members. No way Mason just vanished. Leo, usually the joker, was silent. He didn't know what to think. None of them did. The mood on the Blackwater darkened after that. They continued their work, but the tension was thick. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew what was on their minds. Was Mason still out there, or had something happened to him? Then, it was Leo's turn. It was late, well after dark, when the screams came. Captain Hall and Rob rushed out of their bunks, scrambling onto the deck. They found Leo near the stern, gripping the railing, his face pale. Blood dripped from his hand, and when they got closer, they saw why. A deep gash ran across his palm, as though someone had tried to cut it clean off. He muttered something about seeing a shadow, hearing footsteps behind him, but the words were jumbled, half incoherent. The next morning, Leo was gone. No one heard him leave. No sound of splashing, no sign of a struggle. Just his blood on the deck, and an empty space where he'd slept. Rob snapped then. He went for the new guy, grabbing him by the collar, shaking him violently. "What did you do?" He spat, his voice shaking. The new guy just stared at him, his eyes blank, saying nothing. Captain Hall had to pull them apart, sending Rob below deck to cool off. That night, Captain Hall and Rob sat in the wheelhouse, whispering, trying to make sense of what was happening. 3 men on a boat, 2 of them missing without a trace. They were afraid to say what they both suspected, that one of them might be next. Rob was the last to go. I found his body in the engine room. No sign of a struggle, but his neck had been snapped. Clean and deliberate, like whoever had done it knew exactly what they were doing. I went to tell the captain, but by the time I reached the deck, it was too late. Captain Hall was already gone, just like the others. And then there was one. The sea was calm that day, unnaturally so. The boat drifted aimlessly. All that was left was the quiet, the endless stretch of water, and the silence that settled in after the crew had disappeared, one by one. No one ever found out what happened to the crew of the Blackwater. When the ship returned to shore, it was empty, drifting into the harbor without a soul aboard. People talked, of course. They speculated. Pirates, maybe, or a storm that threw the men overboard. But there was no sign of foul play, no clues left behind, just an empty boat. Some things are best left at sea. You see, the ocean has a way of keeping secrets, No one on land will ever know the truth about the crew of the Black Water. No one but me. And now, you do too. The sea at night is a different beast. It's not the same ocean you see during the day. It's endless, dark, and silent, like the world is holding its breath. That's why most fishermen don't go out after sunset. But Sam and I weren't most fishermen. We needed the catch. We were on Sam's old fishing boat, the Silver Gull, about 5 miles off the coast. It was a calm night, the water flat and still, like glass. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull and the hum of the engine. Above us, the sky was clear, stars scattered like specks of dust in the black. "Good night for it," Sam said, tossing another line over the side. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the horizon, but something about the stillness didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way the water seemed wrong. The kind of wrong you can't put into words. No wind, no waves, just a vast, empty sea. We waited and waited. Not a single bite, not even a twitch on the lines. "Nothing's out here," I said, more to myself than to Sam. He gave me a look, something between frustration and unease, but he didn't say anything. We both felt it. The quiet was different tonight. Then we saw the lights. At first, I thought it was a plane, a faint flicker far off in the sky, hovering silently above the water. But it wasn't moving, just hanging there, motionless. I nudged Sam. "Look at that," I muttered, pointing to the lights. He squinted, his brow furrowing. "Too low for a plane," he said, his voice quieter now. He was right. It was too low and too still. The longer we watched, the more wrong it felt. The light wasn't blinking like a normal aircraft. It was steady, glowing, white and cold. And then it started to move. It wasn't natural. The way it darted across the sky in sharp, jagged angles, left, right, up, down, like it was searching for something or someone. "What the hell is that?" Sam whispered, his eyes wide. I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Suddenly, the light stopped again, hovering directly above us. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. But the sky was clear, no wind, no clouds. And then the sound started. At first it was low, a deep hum that seemed to vibrate through the water, through the boat, through my bones. It grew louder, rising into a strange, pulsating rhythm. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard. Not an engine, not the wind. Something else. Something wrong. "What is that?" Sam asked, his voice shaking now. I shook my head, gripping the side of the boat tightly. The lights grew brighter, shining down on us like spotlights. And the sound, the hum, was almost deafening. "Sam!" I muttered, panic creeping into my voice. "We need to go." I turned to the engine, fumbling to start it. But before I could move, the boat jerked. Not a small shift, but a sudden, violent pull. We both stumbled, grabbing onto anything we could. "The anchor! Did we drag it?" Sam shouted over the noise. But when I looked, the anchor was still down, the chain slack. It wasn't the water pulling us. It was something above. The lights flickered, flashing in rapid succession now, and the hum grew so loud, it felt like the whole world was vibrating. I felt a strange pressure in my head, like my skull was about to split open. Sam dropped to his knees, clutching his ears, screaming, but I couldn't hear him over the sound. Then the light changed. It wasn't just white anymore. It began to pulse. Green, blue, red, flashing faster and faster until it was almost blinding. I felt dizzy, like the boat was spinning, even though we were still. And the hum, God, the hum, it was everywhere, vibrating through my chest, shaking me to my core. The boat lurched again, this time harder. I grabbed the railing, trying to steady myself, but the pull was so strong, it felt like the boat was lifting, rising out of the water. "Sam!" I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the sound. I looked back at him, but he wasn't moving. He was on the deck, eyes wide, his mouth open in a silent scream. But there was no sound, just the hum, that terrible, endless hum. I looked up, squinting into the blinding light, and I saw it. A massive, dark shape, hovering just above us, blocking out the stars. It was smooth, metallic, and the lights were coming from underneath it, beaming down on us. The boat creaked, groaning under the strain as it lifted higher and higher. "We're going up," Sam yelled, his voice frantic, but I couldn't answer. My mouth wouldn't move. My body felt heavy, pinned in place by some invisible force. The last thing I saw was the water, far below us now, growing smaller and smaller as we were pulled up into the light. And then everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke up, I was still on the boat. But it wasn't night anymore. The sun was rising on the horizon, casting an orange glow over the water. The air was quiet, calm, too calm. I sat up, my head pounding, trying to make sense of what had happened. For a moment, I thought it had been a dream, a nightmare, brought on by exhaustion. But when I looked around, something was wrong. Sam was gone. The boat was empty. Just me, alone on the open sea. I stood up, calling his name, my voice hoarse. But there was no answer. I checked every inch of the boat, looked overboard, but the water was still. No sign of him, no sign of anything. That's when I noticed the smell. A strange, metallic scent in the air, faint, but unmistakable. I didn't know what it was. but it made my skin crawl. It was the only reminder that something had happened. Something I couldn't explain. I never saw Sam again. I radioed for help, but when the Coast Guard came, there was no sign of him. They asked me what had happened. I told them the truth. About the lights, about the sound, about how Sam had been there 1 minute and gone the next. They didn't believe me. Why would they? It sounds insane. Hell, I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't lived through it. But every night since then, I've been haunted by those lights. I see them in my dreams. I hear the hum, the sound that burrowed into my skull, shaking me from the inside out. And every time I close my eyes, I see that dark shape in the sky, waiting. There are stories sailors tell, tales of the sea, that are meant to scare you, to keep you on your toes. Most of them are rubbish, old legends passed down through generations, losing their edge with every telling. But there are some stories that stick, some that feel too real to be ignored. We were 3 days out from port, heading toward a distant fishing spot that Captain Jory swore by. The crew wasn't large, just 5 of us aboard the Red Dagger. It was a sturdy vessel, old but reliable, like the men who worked it. We'd been at sea for years, but this trip felt different. Maybe it was the air, thicker than usual, heavy with the smell of salt. Maybe it was the strange, glassy calm of the water. Or maybe it was the way the wind seemed to whisper things none of us wanted to hear. The first night, the fog rolled in, thick and silent, wrapping around the boat like a shroud. We couldn't see more than a few feet ahead of us. Captain Jory ordered us to drop anchor and wait it out. No one argued. We'd sailed through fog before, but this was different. Denser, colder. It clung to your skin, making you feel like something was watching. We were all on edge. Even old Jack, the most seasoned of the crew, kept rubbing his hands together nervously. He muttered something about unnatural fog, but fell quiet when the captain gave him a look. That's when we heard the singing. It was faint at first, barely more than a murmur carried by the wind. A soft, lilting melody that seemed to drift across the water. None of us spoke. We just stood there, listening, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It was a woman's voice, sweet and low, rising and falling like the waves. There were no words, just the melody, a song that seeped into your bones and made you forget everything else. "Who's out there?" Jory called, his voice gruff, breaking the trance. No answer, just the singing. It was closer now, even more distinct. Jack, who had been quiet until now, whispered, "It's her." We all turned to him. "Who?" one of the crew asked. "The siren," Jack said, his voice shaking. "The stories. They say she comes with the fog, lures men to their deaths with her song." We laughed it off, though none of us truly found it funny. Jack was always one for tales, but this This felt too real. The singing grew louder, swirling around us, making the air seem thicker, the night darker. By the time we realized Jack was serious, it was too late. That night, we couldn't sleep. The song wouldn't stop. It followed us everywhere, filling the boat, filling our heads. No matter how hard you tried to block it out, it was there, just at the edge of your mind, pulling you toward it. Tom was the first to go. I don't know what time it was, but I woke to the sound of footsteps on deck. I crawled out of my bunk, groggy, and saw him standing at the edge of the boat, staring out into the fog. "Tom?" I called, but he didn't answer. His eyes were wide, vacant, like he wasn't really there. The song, it was louder now, clearer, like the voice was just beyond the fog. I grabbed him by the arm, shaking him. "Tom, snap out of it." He didn't even look at me. He just smiled. A slow, eerie smile. And then, before I could stop him, he stepped over the side. Out of instinct, I reached out for him. But it was too late. He was gone, swallowed by the fog. No splash, no sound. The others came rushing up, but there was no sign of him. No one could explain it. No one wanted to. By morning, the fog hadn't lifted. The song hadn't stopped. Captain Jory was pale, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He kept muttering to himself, pacing the deck, trying to come up with an explanation. But we all knew. Deep down, we knew. The siren was real, and she wasn't done with us. Jack was next. He had been quiet since Tom vanished, too quiet. That night, he sat at the bow, his eyes fixed on the fog, his lips moving in silent prayer. We didn't try to comfort him. What could we say? The song was louder now. It was everywhere, like the fog itself was singing. And Jack just stood up, walked to the edge, and let himself fall. No fight, no hesitation. We found him floating in the water the next morning. His face was calm, almost peaceful, as if he'd gone willingly. Panic spread quickly after that. The remaining crew, me, Captain Jory, and Blake, were barely holding it together. The fog never lifted. The song never stopped. Blake was the one who snapped. I heard him arguing with Jory late one night, his voice frantic, pleading. "We need to leave," he was saying, his voice trembling. "She's killing us. We have to get out of here." Jory didn't answer. He just stared into the fog, his face gaunt and lifeless. He hadn't spoken in hours. He just stood there, listening to the song. Blake turned to me, desperate. But before I could say anything, he bolted. He ran for the edge, screaming something I couldn't understand. And then he was gone. Another victim claimed by the fog. Now it's just me. The fog is thicker than ever. The song, I can't ignore it anymore. It's inside my head, whispering, coaxing, promising. I can't remember what day it is, how long we've been drifting. I can't remember the sound of anything except her voice. I tried tying myself to the mast, but I can feel it loosening, the knot slipping, the pull getting stronger. Captain Jory's gone now. I found him this morning, floating face down in the water. I didn't try to pull him back. What's the point? The song is so beautiful. I see now why they all went. I see why they couldn't resist. I'm not afraid anymore. I can hear her calling. She's waiting for me. The water is so close, and her voice, it's all I want to hear. I've been on submarines for most of my naval career, and I can tell you one thing. There's no silence like the deep. When you're hundreds of feet below the surface, with nothing but layers of cold water between you and the crushing abyss, it changes you. Out there, in the blackness, even the strongest men feel small. And when something goes wrong, there's nowhere to run. This was supposed to be a routine mission. We were on the USS Valhalla, a nuclear-powered sub tasked with a standard deep-sea survey of the Mariana Trench. The trench, the deepest part of the world's oceans, is a place few dare venture. Even fewer return. It's the kind of place that eats light and swallows sound. The trench is old, ancient, and it has secrets none of us should ever see. Our crew was small, just 20 of us, most seasoned submariners who had done this kind of run a dozen times. The captain, strict but reliable, had a reputation for keeping calm under pressure, and that calmness had kept us all alive through more than a few close calls over the years. But this wasn't something anyone could have prepared for. We had been in the trench for 3 days, steadily descending into its depths, gathering data, scanning the ocean floor. Everything was quiet, the hum of the subsystems blending with the low groan of the water pressing in around us. The deeper we went, the darker it got. Even the sonar had trouble cutting through the layers of water and sediment, giving us fuzzy, incomplete images of what lay below. It was the 4th day when we first noticed something was off. I was in the control room, monitoring the sensors, when the sonar picked up an anomaly, something massive, moving slowly along the ocean floor. At first, we thought it was just a deep-sea ridge, maybe an underwater mountain we hadn't charted before. But it was moving. The blip on the screen was faint, distorted by the water pressure and depth, but it was unmistakable. Whatever it was down there, and it was alive. Could be a whale, the captain said, staring at the screen. But we all knew no whale could dive this deep. Nothing living should be able to survive at this depth. The pressure alone would crush anything without a reinforced hull. Then it disappeared. The sonar went blank. The creature, or whatever it was, vanished from the radar, and the tension in the room thickened. We scanned the area again, but nothing came up. False reading, someone muttered, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over the crew. But none of us believed it. That night, The first incident happened. I was asleep in my bunk when the sub shook violently, like we'd been hit by something. I shot out of bed, my heart racing, alarms blaring through the narrow corridors. I could hear shouting, men scrambling, the sound of metal groaning under stress. The pressure gauges were fluctuating wildly, the lights flickering as we tried to stabilize. "What the hell just happened?" I shouted, grabbing onto the nearest railing as the sub rocked again. "Something hit us," one of the engineers yelled back, his face pale. We were hundreds of feet below the surface, deep in the Mariana Trench. There was nothing down here that should be capable of colliding with us. Nothing. Except that thing we had seen on the sonar. The captain ordered an emergency systems check. The hull was intact, but the sub had sustained damage to its propellers. Something massive, had struck us, and the entire rear of the sub was barely operational. "External damage?" I asked one of the engineers. He nodded grimly. "Something tore into the stern, but we can't go out to inspect. Not at this depth." We were stranded, crippled, and sinking slowly. Hours passed, the crew working frantically to repair the systems, but the atmosphere had changed. Men whispered of sea monsters, of creatures from the deep that no one had ever seen. We all felt it, the weight of the ocean pressing down on us, the silence outside thick and suffocating. Then the tapping started. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the groaning of the sub's hull under pressure. But as it grew louder, more distinct, there was no mistaking it. Something was outside, tapping against the hull. Slow, deliberate, like it was testing us, feeling us out. I was in the control room when the tapping turned into scraping. The sound was metallic, like claws dragging across the steel exterior. It echoed through the sub, sending shivers down my spine. "What the hell is that?" one of the crew asked, his voice shaking. We all stared at the sonar, but nothing was there, just blackness, as if the thing outside didn't exist, or worse, didn't need to be seen. Then, without warning, the lights flickered again, and we felt another impact, this time harder, more deliberate. The sub tilted violently, throwing us against the walls. Men were shouting, alarms blaring, the pressure rising dangerously. We were sinking faster now, descending into the pitch-black trench with no control. The sound of scraping against the hull grew louder, more aggressive, like whatever was out there was clawing its way inside. "We need to surface," the captain ordered, but we all knew the engines weren't capable, not after the damage. The temperature in the sub began to drop, the air growing colder, clammy, as though the water outside was seeping in. The groaning of the hull became deafening, like the sub itself was crying out under the weight of the ocean. And then we heard the sound, a deep, resonant hum, vibrating through the walls of the sub, through our bones. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard. A low, droning call, as if the trench itself had come to life. The sound wrapped around us, filled the air, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The scraping stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then the hull cracked. It wasn't an explosion. It was worse. A slow, steady creak, followed by the sound of metal tearing, water rushing in. The rear compartment was flooding, fast. "Seal it off!" the captain shouted, but it was too late. The water was pouring in faster than we could react. The screams started then, men trapped in the lower levels as the sub filled with freezing water. We could hear them pounding on the walls, begging to be let out, but the pressure was too great. One by one, the pounding stopped, replaced by the gurgling sound of water swallowing them whole. The sub was sinking faster now, and the creature, the thing that had attacked us, wasn't done. We felt it again, another impact, more forceful than before, and the lights went out. Total darkness. In the pitch black, I could hear the breathing of the men around me, short, panicked gasps. We were all waiting for the next hit, the next scrape, the next sound. But it never came. Instead, there was a new noise, a sound none of us expected. Laughter, a deep, guttural laugh, echoing through the darkness, coming from the walls, from the water, from everywhere. It wasn't human. It was ancient, primal, something from the depths, and it knew we were helpless. I don't know what happened after that. I remember the sub shuddering one last time, a final creak as the hull gave way, and the cold rush of water swallowing us whole. The last thing I saw before the dark claimed me was a shape, massive, long, with eyes that gleamed faintly in the abyss, watching us as we disappeared into the trench. There's a rhythm to life at sea, the constant push and pull of the water, the creaking of the boat as it shifts with the waves, the salty air that clings to your skin like a second layer. I've always felt at home out there, even when I shouldn't. My father taught me the ways of the ocean, how to read the winds, how to smell a storm before it hits. He'd say, "The sea has her own rules. Break them, and she'll break you." I never thought much about those words until that trip. It was supposed to be a simple fishing run, just the four of us on the Vanguard. Captain Holden had hired me a year back, said I was one of the best, though I always suspected it was more out of convenience. James was a solid deckhand, good with the nets, though prone to grumbling when things got rough. Levi, the youngest of us, had only been on a few trips, but had the sea in his blood like the rest of us. We'd been working these waters for years. Routine. That's what I thought anyway. We were 2 days out when the storm hit. One of those freak ones that comes out of nowhere, the kind you can't outrun. We battened down, rode it out the best we could. But by the time the skies cleared, we were off course. Way off course. Captain Holden didn't panic. He'd been at sea longer than any of us, but I could see the unease in his eyes when he checked the maps. The equipment wasn't picking up any signals, and the radio was dead. just static, as if the world had gone quiet. "We'll head west," Holden had said. "Find land, resupply, then we'll get back on track." That was 3 days ago. The food was running low, the water even lower. The mood had shifted from easy jokes to tense silence. James wasn't talking much anymore, and Levi was starting to ask questions he shouldn't. But none of us could do anything but stare at the endless stretch of water, hoping for something to break the monotony. And then it did. We saw the island just before sunset. It rose out of the mist like a jagged tooth, the cliffs dark and sheer, with thick jungle spilling down to meet the rocky shore. It wasn't on any of our maps. In fact, it didn't look like it had ever been charted. "Looks like we found land," Levi said, though his voice lacked the relief we all should have felt. Holden stood at the wheel, his eyes narrowed. "Can't say I've ever seen it before." James snorted. "We're lost, Cap. There's nothing out here." But there it was, an island, wild and untouched, sitting in the middle of an ocean that should have been empty. "Doesn't matter where it came from," Holden muttered. "We need fresh water, and there's bound to be some on land." Levi glanced at me, his eyes wide with the same unease I was feeling. There was something wrong about the island. It wasn't just the way it appeared out of nowhere. It was the air around it, thick, heavy, like the island was alive, watching us as we drifted closer. We anchored in a small cove, the water dark and still, reflecting the fading light of the sky like black glass. The jungle loomed over us, dense and impenetrable, with shadows creeping between the trees, even though the sun hadn't fully set. Captain Holden was the first off the boat, followed by James. Levi and I stayed back, staring at the shoreline. "You feel that?" Levi asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded. The air was thick, almost choking, like every breath was harder than the last. "Let's make this quick," Holden called from the beach. "We'll scout for fresh water, then head back to the boat." I grabbed a machete and followed them into the jungle, cutting through the thick foliage as we made our way inland. The trees were twisted, their branches reaching out like claws, the ground soft and damp beneath our boots. There were no birds, no insects, nothing but the sound of our footsteps and the occasional creak of the wind through the trees. It was too quiet. We found a stream about half a mile inland, trickling through the rocks, clear enough to drink from. Holden knelt by the water, filling his canteen, while James stared at the tree line, his face pale. "We shouldn't be here," James muttered, his voice low. Holden shot him a look. "Don't start with that nonsense. It's just a bit of land, nothing to worry about." But I could see it in Holden's eyes. He was lying, to us and to himself. The longer we stayed on that island, the more it felt like it was pulling us in, wrapping around us like the vines that tangled through the trees. Every step deeper into the jungle made my skin crawl, like something was watching us, just out of sight. We filled our canteens and started back toward the boat. But the path we had come in on, it wasn't there anymore. The trees had shifted, the undergrowth thick and tangled, as if the island had swallowed the trail behind us. "We came this way, right?" Levi asked, his voice trembling. I nodded, though doubt was creeping into my mind. The jungle felt different now, more oppressive, the air thicker than before. It was like the island itself was alive, moving around us, trapping us. "We'll find our way back," Holden said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. We pushed forward, but the more we walked, the more everything started to feel wrong. The trees seemed to bend and twist in unnatural ways, the shadows growing longer, darker, even though the sun had barely set. It felt like we were being led somewhere, deeper into the island, away from the boat, away from safety. And that's when we saw them. It started with bones, small at first, scattered animal remains half buried in the dirt, like something had picked them clean. But the farther we went, the larger the bones became. Human bones, skulls, spines, scattered in piles, some cracked open, others left untouched, as if whatever had feasted on them were saving the rest for later. Levi stopped dead in his tracks, his face pale as he stared at the grisly scene. "Turn back," he whispered. "We have to turn back." But there was no going back. The island wouldn't let us. The trees had shifted again, closing in behind us, the path back to the beach now completely gone. I heard it first, soft at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but then it grew louder. Whispers, low, guttural voices, coming from the shadows, from the trees themselves, wrapping around us like the jungle. James was the first to run. He bolted into the trees, crashing through the undergrowth like a wild animal, his breath ragged and panicked. The rest of us stood frozen for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade into the distance. And then, nothing. Silence, not even the rustling of the leaves. "James!" Holden shouted, but there was no response. Just the oppressive silence of the jungle pressing in around us. "We have to go after him," Levi said, but his voice trembled with fear. I wanted to agree, but something told me that James was gone, lost to the island, to whatever was watching us from the trees. We pushed forward, not knowing where we were going anymore, just trying to find a way out. But the jungle was endless, twisting and turning, leading us deeper and deeper into its heart. That's when we found the ruins, half buried in the earth, overgrown with vines and moss. Ancient stones jutted out of the ground like broken teeth. Strange carvings covered the walls, symbols I didn't recognize, but they made my skin crawl, just looking at them. Holden approached the ruins, his hand brushing over the carvings. "This place, it's old," he muttered. "Older than anything I've seen." Levi backed away, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave, now." But there was no leaving. The island had us, and it wasn't letting go. As we stood there, the whispers grew louder, the air thick with tension, the jungle around us closing in. And then, from the shadows, something moved. It was quick, too quick to see clearly. A blur of movement in the trees, low to the ground, slithering through the undergrowth like a predator, stalking its prey. Holden raised his machete, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew, just like I did, that there was no fighting, whatever was out there. "We have to move," I whispered, but my legs wouldn't obey. The thing, whatever it was, moved again, closer this time, its eyes glinting in the darkness. And then Levi's scream pierced through the thick silence of the jungle. I spun around just in time to see him being dragged backward into the trees, his body disappearing into the shadows so fast that I didn't even have time to react. One moment he was there, and the next, the jungle had swallowed him whole. "Levi!" Holden shouted, rushing toward the spot where Levi had been standing just seconds ago. But it was too late. All that remained were drag marks in the dirt, leading into the thick foliage, and a trail of blood glistening in the low light. "Jesus Christ," Holden muttered, backing away, his face pale. "They got him." I felt a chill run down my spine. The jungle was alive. The island was alive. And whatever had taken Levi, it was still out there, waiting. "Run," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We need to run." But Holden wasn't listening. He was staring at the ruins, his eyes wide and fixated on the strange symbols carved into the stones. There was something in them, something that drew him closer, like the island was pulling him in, whispering to him in a language only he could understand. "Captain!" I shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him away from the stones. "We have to go." He blinked, snapping out of whatever trance he was in, and nodded. But the fear in his eyes was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. "Let's head back to the boat," he said, his voice low and shaky, "and get off this island. Now." We ran. We didn't know where we were going, but we ran anyway, crashing through the jungle, our breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers grew louder, circling us from every direction, closing in. And then I heard it, the same rustling from before, something moving through the undergrowth, fast and relentless, keeping pace with us as we stumbled through the trees. I could feel it. It was toying with us, letting us think we had a chance. But we didn't. Holden was ahead of me, his face pale with fear, when I saw him stumble. His foot caught on a root, and he went down hard, landing face first in the dirt. I skidded to a stop, reaching out to help him up. "Come on!" I shouted, pulling him to his feet. "We have to..." But the words died in my throat. Behind him, something was rising from the undergrowth. It was massive, taller than any man, its shape twisted and wrong, its limbs too long, its skin dark and covered in what looked like scales. Its eyes were gleaming, burning with hunger, and its mouth was full of jagged, broken teeth, dripping with blood. Holden didn't see it, but I did. "Run," I whispered, stepping back slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Run." But Holden didn't move. He stood there, frozen, his eyes locked on mine as the creature slithered closer, its breath hot and rancid on the back of his neck. I didn't think. I just ran. I heard Holden scream behind me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not with that thing out there. Not with the island closing in around me, the trees shifting, the whispers growing louder, deafening, like they were inside my head. By the time I reached the beach, I was alone. The Vanguard was still anchored in the cove, bobbing gently on the blood-red water. The sky had darkened, the sun completely gone, replaced by thick, swirling clouds that hung low over the island, casting everything in shadow. I stumbled toward the boat, my legs trembling, my body slick with sweat and fear. But as I reached the shoreline, I stopped. The jungle behind me was still, too still. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw them. The shapes. They were standing at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the dim light, their bodies twisted and broken, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. Levi, James, Holden. But they weren't themselves anymore. Their skin was pale, stretched tight over their bones, their mouths twisted into cruel, hungry smiles. And their eyes, God, their eyes were hollow, empty, like they had been drained of everything that made them human. I took a step back, my feet sinking into the wet sand. We were never supposed to leave, Levi whispered, his voice low and guttural, like the jungle itself was speaking through him. We belong here, Holden added, his mouth twisting into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I turned and bolted for the boat. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps soft but steady, like they were walking through water, like they were already part of the island. I leapt onto the Vanguard, yanking the anchor up, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the engine. The boat roared to life, and I steered it away from the island as fast as I could, not daring to look back. That was 3 days ago. The island is far behind me now, lost to the mist and the sea, but I can still feel it. The weight of it, pressing down on me, pulling at me, like it's still watching, like it's waiting for me to come back. And sometimes, late at night, when the water is calm and the moon is high, I swear I can still hear them. I've spent the last 15 years working at sea. I've seen storms tear ships apart, waves higher than mountains, and waters so calm they felt unnatural. But nothing prepared me for what happened on the Sun Crest. The ocean always felt like home to me. For years, I'd been working aboard cargo ships, sailing across the world, feeling more comfortable out at sea than I ever did on land. Captain Doyle had been at it even longer. He was old school, the kind of captain who didn't say much, but always got the job done. Lisa, our engineer, was a few years younger than me, but she knew the ship's mechanics better than anyone. The three of us made a good team. We had done dozens of transfers together, and this trip was no different. A simple run, pick up the sun crest from port and deliver it to a small island off the coast. No issues, no complications. It was supposed to be routine. The Sun Crest wasn't a large ship, but it was sturdy, reliable. We loaded up supplies, checked the engine, and set off without a hitch. It was a smooth departure, the sun rising behind us, casting long shadows over the still water. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, calm seas, nothing out of the ordinary. By the second day, we had settled into the familiar rhythm of the voyage. Doyle spent most of his time in the wheelhouse, going over the charts and keeping an eye on the radar. Lisa was down in the engine room, making sure everything was running smoothly. And me, I'd been enjoying the quiet. There's something about being out there, surrounded by nothing but the sea, that makes everything else in the world seem so distant, so small. The first sign of something unusual came at dusk, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I was standing on the deck, staring out into the fading light, when I spotted it. A small, dark shape floating in the distance. At first, I thought it was a piece of debris, maybe something that had fallen off another ship. But as we got closer, I realized it wasn't just debris. It was a lifeboat. It drifted aimlessly in the calm waters, bobbing up and down with the gentle waves. Empty. No markings, no identification, no signs of life. Just a solitary, weather-beaten lifeboat floating in the middle of nowhere. "Captain?" I called out, my voice steady but curious. Doyle came up to the deck, binoculars in hand, and scanned the horizon. "Must have drifted from somewhere," he muttered, frowning. Lisa joined us, wiping her hands on a rag, her brow furrowed. "Maybe from a wreck?" she asked. Doyle shook his head. No distress calls, no reports of missing ships in the area. We debated whether to bring it on board. Something about it felt wrong. But in the end, curiosity won. We lowered a small boat, and I went out to check it. The closer I got, the stranger it felt. The lifeboat was old, its wood weathered and cracked, but there was no sign of damage, no signs of struggle or violence, just an empty vessel, abandoned and adrift. When I finally reached it, I peered inside. No bodies, no belongings, nothing but an old blanket crumpled in the corner. But as I leaned in, something caught my eye. 2 words scratched into the wood near the bow. No escape. The letters were jagged, uneven, as if carved in a hurry. The message stark and unsettling. I felt a chill creep up my spine, though the air was warm. I didn't stay long. We hauled the lifeboat onto the deck, but none of us wanted to talk about it. It felt like a bad omen. The ocean, vast and indifferent, suddenly felt smaller, more claustrophobic. That night, the sea changed. The weather reports had promised clear skies, but just after midnight, the fog rolled in. It came out of nowhere, thick and oppressive, swallowing the horizon. The radar showed nothing. No other ships, no land, just endless white. The lights of the sun crest barely pierced the fog, leaving us in a cocoon of silence and mist. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. By morning, the fog hadn't lifted. It clung to the ship, heavy and wet, like something alive. Doyle tried to stay calm, but I could see the tension in his eyes. He wasn't the type to panic, but this was different. Then Lisa went missing. I'd gone down to the engine room to check on her, but she wasn't there. Her tools were scattered across the floor, her work left unfinished. At first I thought maybe she had gone up to the deck, but when I checked, she was nowhere to be found. Doyle and I searched the entire ship, calling her name, checking every corner, every room, but there was no trace of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Maybe she fell overboard, Doyle suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. There were no signs of a struggle, no splashes, no sound, just nothing. That afternoon the temperature dropped. The air, which had been warm and humid, turned icy, sharp against our skin. The fog thickened, pressing in around us, and with it came a sound, a soft rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on the hull. At first, I thought it was the wind or the water lapping against the ship, but the sound was too deliberate, too constant. It followed us. No matter where I went on the ship, I could hear it. Always the same pattern, always the same rhythm. Tap, 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 like someone knocking to come in. That night, Doyle disappeared. I had left him in the wheelhouse, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the fog. But when I returned, the chair was empty. The wheel spun lazily on its own, the boat adrift. I called out for him, my voice echoing through the metal corridors of the ship, but all I got in return was silence. No sign of Doyle, no sign of anyone. I was alone. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see my own hands in front of me. The tapping had grown louder, more insistent. It echoed through the ship, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Tap, tap, tap. I searched every room again, every corner, but the ship felt different, like it had changed, warped somehow. Doors that should have led to familiar places opened into strange, empty rooms. Corridors twisted, leading nowhere. And the lifeboat. It was still there, sitting on the deck, untouched. Yet it felt closer somehow, like it had shifted, just slightly, while I wasn't looking. The words "no escape" seemed deeper now, the scratches more violent, as if whoever had carved them was desperate. I should have abandoned ship. I should have gotten on the radio and called for help. But something held me back. A part of me knew it wouldn't matter. Out there, in the fog, we were lost. Lost to something I couldn't explain. I heard a noise behind me. A faint shuffle, like footsteps. But when I turned, there was no one there. Just the empty deck, the lifeboat, and the endless fog. The tapping grew louder, faster. I stumbled back, feeling the cold metal of the railing against my spine. Then I saw it, just for a moment, a shape moving through the mist, tall, dark, with arms too long, legs that bent wrong. It wasn't human, and it wasn't alone. The last thing I remember was the lifeboat, the way it seemed to grow in the fog, towering over me, the way the air around it shimmered like heat off asphalt, and the voices, whispers, soft and distant, coming from inside the boat. Then the tapping stopped, and the world went black. The truth is, I wasn't supposed to survive either. It started like any other run. The Solace was a piece of junk, but it was ours. Rawlins kept her afloat, just barely, and we'd been running cargo up and down the coast for years. Legal stuff, mostly. But this job, this was different. We were hired to move a sealed shipment. No questions asked. The pay was too good, and the terms were simple. Get the cargo from one place to another. Don't look inside. Don't ask what's in the crates. We'd done similar jobs before. But this time, something didn't sit right. It was the way the client looked at us when we loaded the crates. His eyes. There was something in them that I can't shake, even now. A kind of indifference, like we didn't matter, like we weren't coming back. Captain Rawlins laughed it off. He always did. Superstition doesn't pay the bills, he'd say, and we'd all laugh and forget about it. But the feeling stuck with me. The same feeling you get when you realize you're being watched, when you can't shake the idea that something is behind you, just out of sight. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. I was wrong. We were 3 days out, somewhere in the middle of the South Pacific, when the air started to change. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the atmosphere, like the ocean was holding its breath. At night, the stars seemed to disappear behind an inky black sky, and the horizon, which should have been endless, looked like it was shrinking. The waves grew quieter, almost too calm. We barely noticed. The ocean can play tricks on you when you've been out long enough. That night, I woke up to the sound of tapping. At first I thought it was just the hull creaking, like it always did when the Solace shifted in the water. But this was different. It was rhythmic, steady, like fingers drumming against wood. I lay there, listening, waiting for the sound to fade. It didn't. It grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from the deck. It was coming from the hold, where the crates were stored. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way down. The tapping stopped as soon as my feet hit the last step. There was a heavy, oppressive silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl, the kind that presses in from all sides, smothering the air. I swept the flashlight over the stacked crates, scanning for anything out of place. Everything was where it should be. The crates were sealed tight, just like they had been when we set sail. But the air down there, it was wrong. It smelled like copper, thick and metallic, mixed with something else, something sour, like rotten meat. I gagged, covering my nose, and took a step closer to the largest crate. That's when I heard it. A faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. It was coming from inside the crate. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, the flashlight trembling in my hand. There was no way something could be inside. The crates had been locked up tight since we'd left port, but the scratching didn't stop. And then the whispering started. It was so faint. I thought I was imagining it at first, like a distant murmur carried by the wind. But the longer I stood there, the clearer it became. I couldn't make out the words, but it was there. A voice. No, voices, too many to count, speaking just beneath the sound of the scratching. I backed away slowly, trying to convince myself it was just the storm outside, the wind messing with the boat. But the night was dead calm. I spun around and bolted up the stairs, not looking back until I slammed the hatch shut behind me. I stood there for a moment, gasping for breath, trying to shake the cold sweat that clung to my skin. I didn't say anything to the others. Not yet. The next day, the boat felt different. Paul and Jacobs were quieter than usual, their faces drawn and pale. The captain seemed on edge, snapping at every little thing. We all felt it. The weight in the air, the way the boat creaked even when the sea was still. None of us wanted to go down to the hold, not after that night. But by the afternoon, the smell had reached the deck, that sour metallic stench that clung to the air like death. Even Rawlins couldn't ignore it anymore. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, sniffing the air. I didn't answer. I knew what it was, and so did Paul. He'd gone down to check the hold the night before, and when he came back, he didn't say a word, just locked himself in his cabin and didn't come out for hours. The tapping started again that night, only this time it was louder, more urgent, like something inside the crates was trying to get out. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, willing it to stop. It didn't. And then, just past midnight, I heard something else. Footsteps. Soft, shuffling footsteps, moving slowly down the corridor outside my cabin. I sat up, listening, my pulse quickening. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. I held my breath, waiting. The handle turned, the door creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was Jacobs. His face was pale, his eyes wide and glassy, like he hadn't slept in days. His mouth hung open, but no words came out. He just stood there, staring at me. "Jacobs," I whispered. He didn't respond. He just turned and walked away, back down the corridor, his footsteps slow and deliberate. The next morning, Jacobs was gone. We searched the entire boat, top to bottom, but there was no sign of him. No one had seen him go overboard, and there was no way he could have gotten off the boat. He had just disappeared. Captain Rawlins was furious. He shouted at Paul and me, accusing us of covering for him, of hiding something. But the truth was, we didn't know what was happening. The atmosphere on the boat had changed. There was a heaviness to the air, a pressure that made it hard to think, hard to breathe. It was like the boat itself was sinking, dragging us down into the depths. By the time night fell, the tapping had stopped, but something far worse had taken its place. Whispers, faint at first, barely noticeable, like the sound of the wind rustling through the sails. But they grew louder as the night wore on, until it felt like they were coming from every corner of the boat, circling us, closing in. I couldn't sleep. None of us could. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they weren't soft. They were heavy, deliberate, like someone or something was pacing the deck. I grabbed my flashlight and crept out of my cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. Paul was standing by the hatch to the hold, his back to me, staring down into the darkness. His hands were trembling, and I could hear him muttering under his breath. "Paul," I whispered, stepping closer. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He just kept staring into the hold, his voice a low, trembling whisper. "They're in there," he said, his voice barely audible. "They're waiting." "Who's waiting?" I asked, my throat dry. He turned to face me, and that's when I saw it. His eyes, bloodshot, wild, like something had taken hold of him and wouldn't let go. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his lips were cracked and bleeding. He took a step toward me, his hands trembling, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "They want out," he whispered, his voice trembling with fear. "They want us." Paul didn't make it through the night. Captain Rawlins lasted one more day. I found him at dawn, standing by the edge of the deck, staring out into the horizon. His eyes were empty, his body swaying gently with the boat. When I called out to him, he didn't turn. He just stepped forward into the water and disappeared beneath the waves without a sound. By the time the rescue crew found the solace, I was the only one left. They never found the bodies, and I've never told anyone the truth. I've been at sea for over 2 decades now. It's not glamorous, and it's not for the faint of heart. Most people can't handle the isolation, the endless horizon, or the vast, crushing emptiness of the ocean. But me? I've always preferred it. No ties, no family, just the hum of the ship and the company of men who understood the ocean as I did. It was safer than the world on land, or at least I thought it was. I'd been working with Captain Morris for years, ever since the Seafarer became my second home. The crew was small, Jonesy, Carter, Luis, Danny, Morris, and me, but we were tight-knit, seasoned sailors who could handle anything the sea threw at us. Or so we thought. That last run wasn't supposed to be different from any other. Hauling cargo down the coast, clear skies, calm seas, just another job. No one had expected trouble. Pirate waters were far away, or so we believed. But the ocean has a way of hiding things until it's too late. I still remember the way the sun looked that afternoon, setting low, casting an orange glow across the water, turning the sea into a burning, endless stretch. There was something peaceful about it. That was the last time I felt safe. Jonesy spotted the boat first, a small dot on the horizon. I didn't think much of it. Fishing boats were common enough in these waters, and we'd passed plenty of them. But Jonesy kept watching, his brow furrowed, his hand shielding his eyes from the glare. "Captain," he called out, his voice tight with unease. Morris came up from the wheelhouse, his binoculars already in hand. He stared at the boat for a long moment, longer than I expected. Then he lowered the binoculars, his face pale. "They're armed," he said quietly, almost to himself. His voice had a weight to it that sent a chill through me. Pirates. I didn't want to believe it. Pirates were a thing you heard about in far-off waters. Somalia, the Strait of Malacca. Not here. Not where we were. "Lock it all down," Morris ordered, his voice steady, but I could hear the urgency underneath. We didn't need to ask twice. The crew sprang into action, sealing the doors, locking the cargo hold, doing everything we could to secure the ship. But even as we worked, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The Seafarer wasn't designed for speed, and the pirates were closing in fast. The first shot rang out just as I reached the engine room. A sharp crack that echoed over the water, cutting through the fading light like a knife. I ducked inside, my heart pounding in my chest. We'd rehearsed for this, but it's different when it's real. When you know men with guns are coming for you, and there's nowhere to run. From my hiding spot below deck, I could hear the roar of their engine as they pulled alongside us. Voices shouting in a language I didn't understand. The clank of metal as they threw grappling hooks over the side. I heard the scuffle of boots on the deck. They were boarding. The first scream made my blood run cold. It was Carter. He'd been on deck when they climbed aboard, probably trying to reason with them. I could hear his voice, loud and defiant, but then there was a shot, short, sharp, and the defiance was gone. I heard his body hit the deck with a sickening thud. I stayed in the engine room, crouched behind the old metal generators, trying to keep quiet, trying to stay calm. But I wasn't calm. None of us were. I could feel the fear crawling up my spine, making my skin prickle. Footsteps thudded overhead. They were moving quickly, systematically, going through the ship like hunters. They weren't just here to rob us. They wanted blood. Danny was next. I didn't see what happened, but I heard it. The crash of metal pots and pans hitting the floor as they dragged him out of the galley. his voice high and desperate as he begged for his life. I didn't hear the words, but I heard the tone, the fear. Then the gunfire, 3 shots, quick and efficient. Then silence. I clenched my teeth, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was next. I knew it. They were going to find me. I pressed myself against the cold metal, trying to stay invisible, trying to make myself smaller, quieter. Then I heard Luis. He didn't beg. He fought. I heard the struggle, the shouts, the thuds of bodies hitting walls, the sound of something breaking. Then there was a scream, sharp and animalistic, followed by a gurgling sound. It wasn't like the others. It was worse, more violent. I could hear the life draining out of him, hear the pirates laughing as they left him to die. I had to remind myself to breathe, but each breath felt like it might give me away. Morris. He was up in the wheelhouse, trying to keep the ship steady, trying to salvage what was left of our situation. I heard his voice over the radio, calling for help. But we both knew it was useless. We were too far out. Help wouldn't come in time. Help wouldn't come at all. When I heard the footsteps climbing the stairs to the wheelhouse, my stomach twisted into knots. There was a struggle, brief, brutal. The sound of flesh hitting flesh, something heavy crashing to the floor. Then the crack of a rifle butt hitting bone. Morris's voice stopped. It was over. The pirates moved through the ship like shadows, checking every room, every compartment. I heard them coming closer, their boots echoing on the metal floors. They were systematic, like they had done this 100 times before. I knew it was only a matter of minutes before they found me. The door to the engine room creaked open. I held my breath, crouching lower behind the generator, my body trembling. I could hear them moving around the room, their voices low, their boots thudding on the floor. They were close, so close I could smell the salt on their clothes, the sweat on their skin. One of them paused near where I was hiding. I could see his shadow stretching across the floor, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He stood there for what felt like hours, scanning the room, his fingers twitching on the trigger. Then, just as quickly as he had come, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. I stayed hidden, my body rigid, every muscle tight. I didn't move. I didn't even dare breathe until I was sure they were gone. The silence was deafening. I waited for what felt like hours before I finally emerged. The ship was dead. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull, the distant hum of the engine below. But the seafarer was a graveyard. The deck was slick with blood. Jonesy, Carter, Danny, Luis, even Morris lay where they had fallen, their bodies broken, lifeless. The pirates had taken everything of value. Everything except me. I stepped out onto the deck, the salt air filling my lungs. and I looked out at the endless horizon. The small pirate boat was already a distant blur, disappearing into the twilight. I don't know why they didn't kill me. Maybe they didn't find me. Maybe they didn't care. Or maybe they wanted me to live with it, live with the memory of my friends, my family, slaughtered around me. I'll never know why they left me alive, but I'll never forget what they took with them. It was supposed to be my last run. 5 more days at sea, and I was done for good. I'd spent too many years out here, watching the horizon bleed into the sky, feeling the salt eat away at my skin. The ocean isn't kind to men like me, men who stay out here too long. You start losing pieces of yourself, little by little. First, it's the little things, like the smell of fresh earth, or the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. Then it's the bigger pieces, friends, family, until there's nothing left but the sea, and the men who still think they can beat it. Captain Alistair was one of those men, stubborn as hell, weathered, and tougher than the iron hulls of the boats he steered. I'd sailed with him for nearly 10 years, watching him survive things that would have sent most men running for the shore. He wasn't the type to give up, which is why I'd signed on for one last trip with him. Easy money, he'd said. A quick cargo haul up the coast. No big storms this time of year. No pirates, no trouble. Just one more run, and I could hang up my sea legs for good. The crew was small. Just me, Charlie, and Gabe. 3 men who knew the boat like the backs of our hands. We weren't a fancy operation. We didn't need to be. A couple of rusted winches, a radio that only worked half the time, and a steel hull that had been patched more times than I could count. But it got the job done. We set out from the docks 5 days ago, and the first couple of days were smooth enough. Clear skies, a steady breeze, and the boat cutting through the water like it was still young. I spent my time on deck, smoking cheap cigarettes, and thinking about what life on land might look like after this. Maybe I'd settle somewhere far from the ocean. Maybe I'd find a way to forget it all. But then the storm came. It hit us on the 3rd night, sudden and vicious, like the sea was punishing us for daring to think we'd get off easy. The wind howled and shrieked, driving waves as tall as buildings over the deck, battering the boat like it was made of tin. The radio went dead within hours, and the compass was useless, spinning in circles like it had lost its mind. For 2 days, we fought the storm, all of us exhausted, soaked to the bone, barely able to keep the boat from capsizing. Captain Alistair hadn't slept. He was at the helm the entire time, his hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles were bone white. Charlie and Gabe did what they could to keep the boat together, patching leaks, tying down the cargo, bailing out water when the bilge pump started to fail. We didn't speak much during those hours. There wasn't time for words, just survival. But on the 2nd night of the storm, something changed. It was after midnight. The rain was coming down in thick sheets, the kind that blinds you, and the wind was a constant, deafening roar. I was on deck, securing the last of the cargo, when I saw it. A light. At first I thought it was just the lightning, but this was different. It was steady, rhythmic, cutting through the darkness in a way that made my stomach twist. A lighthouse. "Captain!" I exclaimed, my voice barely carrying over the storm. Alistair turned from the helm, his face grim, the weight of the storm carved into every line. He followed my gaze, squinting through the rain. "There's no lighthouse out here," he said, more to himself than to me. But the light was there, clear as day, pulsing in the distance, calling to us. "We need to head toward it," Charlie yelled, stumbling toward the helm. "We can't take another night out here." Gabe nodded in agreement, his face pale from exhaustion. The captain hesitated for only a moment before turning the wheel. "All right, boys," he said, his voice low and tense. "Let's see where this takes us." The boat groaned in protest as it changed course, but the light was our only hope. The waves seemed to ease a little as we steered toward it, but the air grew thicker, heavier, like the storm had become something more than just wind and rain, something alive, something watching. As we got closer, the lighthouse came into view, standing on a jagged cliff that seemed to rise straight out of the ocean. It was old, weather-beaten, with stone walls blackened by time and neglect. There were no markings, no signs of any kind, and the windows were dark. But the light, it kept flashing, steady and bright, cutting through the storm like a beacon of salvation. "There's no lighthouse on the charts," Gabe muttered. "Doesn't matter," Captain Alistair replied. "It's land. That's all that matters right now." We pulled into a small cove at the base of the cliffs, the waves still battering us, but with less fury now. The boat scraped against the rocks as we anchored, and the four of us clambered onto the shore, our clothes soaked through, our bodies numb from the cold. The wind howled around us, but something about it felt different now, like the storm had been waiting for us to land. Charlie was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "This place doesn't feel right." He wasn't wrong. There was something about the air, thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on us, suffocating us. The lighthouse loomed above, its beacon spinning endlessly, but there was no sign of life. No keeper, no other boats, no sign that anyone had been here in years. "We need to find shelter," Alistair said, shaking off the cold. "The lighthouse is our best bet. We'll wait out the storm and head back at first light." The rest of us nodded, too tired and too beaten down to argue. We grabbed what supplies we could and started up the narrow rocky path that led to the lighthouse. As we climbed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the storm wasn't done with us yet. The door to the lighthouse was old, rusted and swollen from years of salt water and neglect. Charlie gave it a push, and it groaned open, the sound echoing through the cliffs like a warning. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of rot and mildew. The floor was slick with moisture, and the walls were covered in a dark, oily grime that seemed to pulse in the light of our lanterns. Everything about the place screamed abandonment, yet the beacon above spun with mechanical precision. "How's the light still working?" Gabe asked, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "It's like the place is dead, but the lights..." "Forget it," the captain cut him off. "Let's just get inside, set up camp, and wait this thing out." We made our way further into the lighthouse, the damp air clinging to our skin. Every step echoed, bouncing off the stone walls, but it felt like the sound was swallowed, almost as soon as it left our mouths. Then we heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from above us, from the tower itself. We all froze. The sound of those footsteps echoed through the narrow stone stairwell, heavy and deliberate, like someone was pacing above us. But that couldn't be possible. The lighthouse had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. There was no one else here, or so we thought. Captain Alistair took a step forward, his eyes locked on the dark stairwell that spiraled up into the tower. "Stay here," he said, his voice steady, though I could hear the strain beneath it. "I'll check it out." Charlie and Gabe exchanged nervous glances, but neither of them said a word. We were all thinking the same thing. Those footsteps were too slow, too measured to belong to any of us, but they were unmistakable. The captain climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under his weight. The rest of us stood in silence, our breath caught in our throats. The only sound was the steady hum of the storm outside, muted by the thick stone walls of the lighthouse. The footsteps stopped. We waited. 1 minute, 2, nothing. "Captain?" Charlie called out, his voice shaky. There was no response. I could feel the tension in the room growing thicker by the second, a knot tightening in my chest. The air felt wrong, heavy, like something was pushing down on us from all sides. "I'm going up there," I said, grabbing a lantern and heading toward the stairs before anyone could stop me. I wasn't about to leave him up there alone. As I climbed, the air grew colder, the smell of damp stone and rot growing stronger. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the stairs themselves were trying to drag me back down. When I reached the top, I found the captain standing by the window, staring out into the storm, the light from the beacon casting long, eerie shadows across the room. "Captain," I whispered, stepping closer. He didn't move. His back was rigid, his hands gripping the windowsill so tightly, his knuckles had gone white. I stepped around to face him, but the moment I saw his eyes, my blood ran cold. He wasn't looking at the storm. He was looking at something else, something I couldn't see. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, his face pale and slick with sweat. His mouth moved, barely a whisper escaping his lips. But the words, they didn't make sense. "They're coming," he muttered, his voice low and trembling. "They're coming for us." "Who?" I asked, grabbing his arm, trying to shake him out of whatever trance had taken hold of him. "Who's coming?" But he just kept staring, his eyes locked on something far beyond the storm, something I couldn't see. And then I heard it, a faint whisper. It was barely audible, like the wind had found a voice of its own, carried by the storm and wrapped around the lighthouse. But it wasn't the wind. I turned, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. There, just beyond the reach of the light, standing at the edge of the cliff, was a figure, a tall, shadowy figure, barely more than a silhouette against the storm. It was standing still, facing the lighthouse, watching us. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be real, just a trick of the light, maybe the reflection of the beacon. But as I watched, the figure moved, stepping closer to the lighthouse, its shape distorted by the wind and rain. And behind it, more shapes, more figures, all moving slowly toward us, like they were rising from the sea itself. "They're here," Captain Alastair whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "They've been waiting." I backed away from the window, my legs trembling. "What the hell is that?" I gasped, but the captain didn't answer. He just kept staring, his eyes wide and empty. I grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him. "Snap out of it. We need to go, now." But before I could pull him away from the window, the door at the base of the tower slammed shut with a deafening crack. The entire room shuddered, the stone walls groaning as if they were alive, as if the lighthouse itself was waking up. From below, I heard Charlie and Gabe shouting, banging on the door, but the sound was distant, muffled, like they were a mile away instead of just downstairs. The air grew thick, suffocating, and that whisper, the one that had seemed like the wind, was getting louder, closer. It was inside the lighthouse now. I turned toward the stairs, but before I could move, the captain let out a sharp, gasping breath. I spun around, just in time to see his body convulse, his eyes rolling back into his head. He collapsed to the floor, his body twitching violently, foam bubbling at the corners of his mouth. "Captain!" I shouted, dropping to my knees, grabbing him, trying to hold him still. But there was nothing I could do. His body jerked one last time, and then he went limp, his head lolling to the side, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. I staggered to my feet, panic surging through me. The whisper was a roar now, deafening, filling the room, filling my head. It wasn't just noise, it was words, voices. "Get out." I ran. I stumbled down the narrow stairwell, my legs weak, my heart racing so fast it felt like it might burst. But the air was thicker now, darker, as if the shadows themselves were closing in around me. When I reached the bottom, the door was still closed, but the banging had stopped. Charlie and Gabe were standing in the middle of the room, their faces pale, eyes wide. They weren't moving. "What the hell is happening?" I shouted. But they didn't respond. They just stared at me, their faces blank, empty. like they were waiting for something. And then I saw it. The same shadowy figures, the same shapes I'd seen outside, were standing in the corners of the room, barely visible in the dim light. But they were there. I could feel them, their cold, dead eyes watching us. Charlie's lips moved, but his voice wasn't his own. They've been waiting. I backed away, my mind racing, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out, but my body wouldn't move. The shadows were closing in now, circling us, their whispers filling the room, wrapping around us like chains. Gabe took a step forward, his eyes dark, his voice a low, guttural whisper. It's too late. And then the lights went out. There are things I've seen at sea that would turn a landman's stomach. A ship caught in a storm so violent, the waves swallowed it whole. A fisherman dragged overboard by something too big for his net. But nothing compares to what happened on the Harbinger that day. I've been working these waters for over 20 years. The sea is home to me, its moods as familiar as my own. When you're out there long enough, you learn to respect it, to feel its changes before they come. Most of the men I've worked with would tell you the same until they can't. That's the thing about the sea. It keeps its secrets, and when it takes, it doesn't give back. The Harbinger wasn't much, just a small fishing trawler, barely fit for the open ocean. But she held up well enough for 4 of us. Me, Captain Graves, Davis, and Tucker. Graves had been running this boat for years, steady and dependable. Davis, a big man with an easy laugh, handled most of the heavy work, while Tucker kept to himself, sharp-eyed and quiet. We didn't talk much out there, didn't need to. We knew each other's rhythms, the way men do when they've been on the water together long enough. It was our 5th day out when things started to feel off. The morning was grey, as usual, with a slow swell rocking the boat. We were farther out than normal, trying a spot Graves swore by. Some deep water trench he claimed was always good for a catch. The fish weren't biting like they should have been, though. It was strange, but we weren't panicking. Graves knew his waters, and he trusted them. Around midday, a fog started to roll in from the east. Now, fog wasn't anything new out here, but this was different. It wasn't the low, drifting kind we usually saw. This fog had a weight to it, thick and yellowish at the edges, as though it was stained by something. We stood on deck, watching it crawl toward us, slow and heavy. Davis cracked a joke about the old man of the sea coming to visit, but there was no humor in his eyes. I could feel it too. The air had changed. The mist swallowed the horizon first, turning the world around us into a hazy blur. I've never seen fog like that. So thick, you couldn't see the bow of the boat from the stern. The engine hummed quietly beneath us, but the sound felt muffled, distant, as if the fog itself was swallowing every noise. It had a smell, too, something sharp, chemical, mixed with the musty scent of rot. I looked at Graves, and he just shook his head, lighting up a cigarette with shaky hands. By mid-afternoon, the mist had fully settled over the boat. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing, and the air felt damp, suffocating. None of us spoke much after that. Davis kept pacing, restless, like a man who didn't know what to do with his hands. Tucker stared out at the fog, his face blank, but his eyes. There was something wrong in his eyes. That night, the first of us cracked. It was Davis. Big, strong Davis. Always the first to laugh, the last to panic. I was below deck, trying to get some rest, when I heard the shouting. I scrambled up the ladder, my heart pounding, only to find Davis standing on deck, his hands clutched around Tucker's throat. Tucker was gasping, his face red, his feet kicking helplessly as Davis lifted him clear off the ground. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running toward them, but Davis didn't even glance my way. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, his lips curled back in a snarl. It was like he didn't recognize us, like something had snapped inside him. I lunged at him, trying to pull him off, but Davis was built like a bull. It was Graves who stopped him, smashing the butt of his rifle into Davis's head with a sickening thud. Davis let go. Tucker crumpled to the deck, and Davis stood there, swaying, blood trickling down his temple, his breath coming in ragged bursts. But his eyes, those wild, maddened eyes, they never changed. We tied Davis up after that, locking him in the storage room below deck, though none of us wanted to go near him. The look on his face was burned into my memory, something primal and feral, as if he had lost all trace of humanity. "Must have been the fog," Graves muttered, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Maybe it's got something in it, something toxic." Tucker said nothing, just sat there clutching his throat, his eyes staring into the middle distance. The next morning, Davis was dead. We found him in the storage room, slumped against the wall, his eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. His wrists were raw from where he'd struggled against the ropes, but there was no sign of violence, no wounds. It was like he'd just stopped. Tucker was the first to speak. "His skin," he whispered, his voice hoarse from Davis's hands. "Look at his skin." Davis's body was covered in sores, red welts that oozed a thick black fluid. His lips were cracked, his eyes bloodshot and bulging, as if something inside him had poisoned him from the inside out. I felt bile rise in my throat as I backed away. Graves swore under his breath, kicking a loose board on the deck. "This fog," I muttered, wiping sweat from my brow. "There's something in it." Graves didn't argue. By afternoon, the fog was thicker than ever, clinging to the boat like a shroud. We couldn't see more than a foot in front of us, and every breath felt heavier, as if the air was turning to sludge. My head ached, and my skin itched with an intensity that made me want to tear it off. Tucker wasn't much better. His eyes had gone dark, and he had started muttering to himself, staring out at the thick mist, rocking slightly. We needed to get out of there. Graves tried restarting the engine, but something was wrong. It spluttered, then died. He swore, kicking the console as the fog pressed closer, wrapping around the boat. And then Tucker snapped. I heard him before I saw him. Guttural screams from below deck, followed by the sound of metal clanging and crashing. When I rushed down, I found him, face pale and slick with sweat, standing over Davis's body with a knife. His shirt was soaked in blood, the blade gleaming in the dim light, and in his eyes, madness. They're inside him, he rasped, raising the knife again. They're inside all of us. I don't remember what happened next. I just know I grabbed something, anything, and hit him as hard as I could. The last thing I remember is the fog, curling tighter, whispering things I didn't want to hear. If anyone finds this, know we didn't kill each other because we wanted to. We had no choice. Something's in the fog. July 5th, 1702. We set sail today, bound for the West Indies. The hold is full, and the crew is in decent spirits. But something feels different this time. Since the ship was nearly wrecked in that storm last season, it's like a shadow has fallen over her. The repairs were done, and the vessel looks sound, yet the timbers creak at night in ways they shouldn't. The old aft cabin, which used to be occupied before the storm, remains empty. None of us dare sleep in there now. No one speaks of it, but we all feel it. The ship isn't right. Perhaps it's just the memories of the 2 men we lost to the storm. But something about this journey feels cursed. July 6th, 1702. Last night, I dreamt of the storm. In the dream, the sea was calm, but I felt the same terror from that night, months ago. I was standing on deck, and everything was silent. No wind, no sound from the sea. Just an oppressive stillness. I turned toward the aft, and there, standing by the rail, was a figure. He was dressed in the same clothes as before he was taken by the sea, but his face, it was lifeless, eyes wide, mouth open as though he was trying to scream. I woke suddenly, drenched in sweat. The oddest part wasn't the dream. When I awoke, I heard footsteps above my cabin, slow and deliberate. I assumed it was someone on watch, but when I asked today, no one had been on deck at that hour. July 7th, 1702. There are whispers among the crew. Some of the men claim to have heard knocking from inside the aft cabin, though no one has stayed there since the storm. It's been left untouched, the door sealed tight. None of us dare go near it unless necessary. There's an unease aboard the Providence now, a weight that hangs in the air. I can't explain it, but even the most seasoned of the crew avoid the aft section. Superstition runs deep at sea, and I fear it's only growing worse. The captain remains tight-lipped, insisting we focus on the journey ahead. but I've noticed he avoids the aft cabin as much as the rest of us. July 8th, 1702. Something is wrong. I had the night watch, and while standing by the wheel, I noticed a shadow moving near the aft cabin. It was faint, just a flicker at the edge of my vision. But when I turned to look directly, it was gone. I thought it was one of the crew, perhaps checking the lines, but the door to the cabin was slightly ajar. That door has been closed since we set sail. I walked over to shut it, but as I approached, the air turned cold, unnaturally cold. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. When I reached for the door, a soft sound came from within, like the distant murmur of a voice, just below a whisper. I didn't open the door. I turned and walked back to the wheel, but I haven't been able to shake the feeling that something or someone is with us. July 9th, 1702. We are becalmed. The wind has died, and we sit adrift in still water. The calm should be a relief, but it only deepens the unease among the men. They say the ship is cursed, that it carries a ghost with us, seeking revenge for what happened during the storm. None will speak directly of it, but I know we're all thinking the same thing. Last night, the knocking returned, louder this time. I heard it from below deck, a slow, deliberate rhythm coming from the aft cabin. Some of the men swear they've seen movement near the cabin, shadows shifting where no one should be. The captain insists we stay the course, but even he looks nervous now. We all feel it. Something is waiting for us. July 10th, 1702. This morning, one of the crew went missing. His bunk was untouched, his possessions still in place, but he is nowhere to be found. We searched the entire ship, top to bottom, but there was no sign of him. No one saw him go overboard. No one heard anything during the night. The men are terrified. They say the ship is haunted by the souls we lost in the storm. Some even claim to have seen a figure walking the deck in the dead of night, always near the aft cabin. I don't believe in ghosts, but there is something here with us. I can feel it, and it's getting closer. July 11th, 1702. Last night I couldn't sleep. The air was thick, suffocating, and every creak of the ship made my heart race. I went to the deck for air, hoping the open sky would ease my nerves, but I wasn't alone. As I stood by the railing, I saw movement near the aft cabin. A figure, barely visible in the moonlight, standing perfectly still. For a moment, I thought it was one of the crew, but as I approached, the figure vanished, dissolving into the shadows. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where it had been. The cabin door was open again. I know I closed it. The crew is in a state of silent panic. None of us will say it, but we are all afraid of what's inside that cabin. July 12th, 1702. Another man is gone. No one saw him leave. No one heard a sound, but he has disappeared, just like the first. There was no splash, no cry for help, nothing. We are alone in the dead calm of the ocean, and something is picking us off one by one. The captain refuses to acknowledge it, but I see the fear in his eyes. He doesn't go near the aft anymore. None of us do. Last night, I woke to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing the deck above my cabin. I lay there, frozen, listening as they moved back and forth, always stopping near the aft cabin. When I finally mustered the courage to look, there was no one there. I fear we are not alone on this ship. July 13th, 1702. The captain is missing. We woke this morning to find his cabin empty, the door wide open. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that he left voluntarily. The men are near mutiny, terrified beyond reason, and I cannot blame them. We are adrift in still waters, and our numbers are dwindling. One by one, we are being taken. The aft cabin remains closed now, but I know it won't stay that way for long. Something wants us to open it. Something is waiting inside. I can hear it at night, whispering, calling to us. July 14th, 1702. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. There are only a few of us left now, and the whispers have grown louder. I hear them even in the daylight, faint but constant, urging me to go to the aft cabin. I won't. I can't. Whatever is in there, it's not one of us. The others are gone, and I know my time is coming. The ship is quiet, too quiet, and I can feel the presence of something watching me, waiting. I see shadows move where there should be none, and the footsteps never stop. They circle the deck, stopping just outside my door. I don't think I will survive the night. If anyone finds this journal, know this: the Providence is cursed